Good afternoon. Today is December 18th, 2025, and my name is Richard Ackley, an 80-year-old Ojibwe Chippewa tribal male who lives amongst the Oneidas. This video is being assisted by Mr. Tim Webster, who is an Oneida elder who is the technical support. Throughout the months, I am attempting to provide a narrative and oral tradition of various themes that reflect Indigenous spirituality. I am a Native person who is an Episcopalian, and I practice the Episcopal faith through its polity, but I'm also a Ojibwe from northern Wisconsin, and I have been, I believe, part of an experience that allows me to share my Indigenous spirituality. And what does that mean? It means to me that throughout my lifetime, where I lived along the shores of Lake Superior, I may be repeating this each time I do a video, that the uniqueness of land and sense of place has given me the opportunity to provide my insights. I would guess this is the same tradition, not to put me in any category to compare to anyone, whether it be Vine Deloria, Steve Charlson, or whoever it is. But there is such a construct of Native or Indigenous theology. I was at a coffee shop earlier this week, and a retired, or he got let go, I guess, from a university biblical scholar. And I said, I'm a big friend of Paul Tillich, 1, 2, and 3. He said, he was kind of a sleazy guy. I said, I don't want to get into this conversation. There's this constant dilemma between theologians that represent 2,000 years of since the birth of Christ and the Indigenous spirituality from many different tribes across the nation. My opinions are basically mine within the opinion of the shared area where I grew up. As I stated in my previous videos, I'll be doing these monthly in the coming months to explain what I believe is an important aspect of a degree of understanding of Indigenous spirituality. Today's topic has to do with Advent and its cross references to Indigenous spirituality. My cousin who has passed away has said, we ought not to use the pen, but I'll do this orally, but within my brain cells, I have a format that I will use. I will start off many of these videos with the understanding of what I call AI. No matter not that AI is important. As a kid growing up, we had the encyclopedia, we had the elders. One of my good friends who was a trained cosmologist about Indigenous constellations, you look him up on AI, he's the only person listed. So throughout one's life journey, they need to be prepared to understand these are opinions. Some are based in tradition. And as we know, sight perhaps is the best introduction, and these videos are providing visual of who I am. Sound is the most logical sense. Of course, I wonder, we have taken sound to mean just about anything as we express ourselves. But according to AI, Advent and Indigenous spirituality intersects through shared themes of waiting, light, dark, creation, justice, and a deep longing for the sacred. Indigenous spirituality honors the earth as sacred. This connects to Christian creation spirituality, seeing God or the Creator in nature, using certain practices, smudging alongside Advent candles and these kinds of things. Perhaps what's more important in this day and age for a person like me, as AI would say here, would be justice and liberation. Advent calls for us to understand who we are as we relate to one another. The cultural integration, which I find not so much the integration as the balance. Throughout the videos I do, I try to put the platform of Native spirituality, Indigenous spirituality, within the context of biblical. I'm not saying the 2,000 years are important to the scholars. All I'm trying to say is native people, tribal people need to have a sense of place as they enter that Christian context. The Ojibwe experience that I'm part of, there are over 155, it may be a little hard to see, communities in Canada and the United States. And there's also, of the 155 communities, they have something that has to do with water, lake, river, and other things. So we are connected to the north, connected to that dynamic. But now to get back to Advent, and I didn't realize this, that the Advent candles came from a German tradition. And I didn't realize Advent, from what I've been told, looking up some of this material, came from the 3rd century. I could be wrong about that. But for me, growing up in the experience, I believe Advent to me, the reason why I always like the word Advent, the preparing or the change, the moving forward. And the important thing for me is I've tried to balance, and I didn't realize I was balancing this, that as a child growing up, and adult now, many years in this thing, it says the arrival of a thing or an event. Some of the theology considers the second coming of Christ. I won't go there, because to me the image of the Christology I'm part of, I'm comfortable with the Creator, with Jesus, and the Spirit. Some religious denominations are patiently waiting for the second Christ, the second coming of Jesus Christ. But for me, the event of Advent is the arrival of winter. And winter to me is so important because as I attempt to slow my pace down, it is a time to look at yourself, look in your community, and if you've done well in the spring, summer, and fall, you've done well to prepare yourself for the winter time. That means if you've harvested wild rice, you have enough rice to carry you through the difficult times in the winter. 2, if you have enough venison, I know this is 2025, so I'm sharing a format recently I mentioned in a previous video, I've been on a change, so every human being only needs 2,000 calories, I've been told. But because of the weather, growing up, there was the need for good food. Then from that, if you had fish and if you had other types of food growing up in the north. Now, I'm well aware of the European colonists coming over. I'm well aware of the German farmers who wanted to cut every tree down and plant. I'm well aware of all around the world there's different ways for harvest. But in the world I'm from, we consider wild rice like sacred spiritual food. Now, why is that important? Because when it's a cold time in the north and the wind and it's 20, 30 below, you have to have good food, to live out that experience. But also, Advent, if we say it's a new beginning, and for us, the word sin, I mean, there's basic sin of greed, violence, and people one another. But if you look at the word sin, and I suppose religious, whether it be the Book of Common Prayer, whether it be the Bible, New Testament, don't do justice to maybe it's being out of kilt of being in community. Why is community so important? Someone said to me, I was on another, in this day and age, 2025, If you haven't been on a Zoom call, you haven't been dealing with technology or GoToMeeting. Someone said, well, you really value community. I says, well, what else is there but living in community with your brothers and sisters? And some say brothers and sisters in Christ, brothers and sisters in Creator. But to get back to Advent, the dynamics of Advent that reflect hope, and I'll summarize this very carefully because of the limited time. I don't imagine myself getting in a canoe and paddling down to the mouth of the river. What I imagine myself doing is being very careful, even though it's raining here in Green Bay, walking along the river very close to the bank where it's still icy. If I went further out 10 feet, I'd sink. So as I'm wandering through the river, down by the river, or from wandering through a trail, I'm being real careful in the winter to determine, why am I out there? Am I out there just to enjoy the cold air? Am I out there to find, a little early to be taking rabbits, it has to be really cold. Are just out there enjoying, some people say, the woods and the forest, and the woods are providing me a sense of, I like the woods, I like the cold weather. Some of my relatives live in Tampa, it's just not me. People are 80 degrees, but to get back to the north, if I wasn't doing that, I'd be walking along Lake Superior. But what does it have to do with a new beginning? If I'm out of sync with my community, then I need to get back. But to get back to this concept of the word sin, I believe that if you're not congruent within your faith community or your tribal community, you are a hindrance and you may be a troublesome person in that context. Now, one has to be very careful about promoting anything that people may take for, I don't want to overuse the word gospel or the parables or the psalms or the tribal things, but what tribal people do in the winter is they first examine, as I said, from spring, summer to fall. There may be some misfortunes, there may be some hopeful things. The wild rice season may not have been good, so you have enough rice. Before I prepared myself with this, I went through a lot of the old Ojibwe texts about good or bad years. In the 1800s, there were good years and bad years. What were the dynamics of today? You have all this technology. So as 2025, 100 years from now, they'll have everything to the point of us sitting here. And when this video took place, the knowledge will be in the clouds. What cloud or what data center it will be in, who knows? But what's important for the tribe I'm from is we have something called the North. And the North is, it's interesting, I'm sitting here, and from what I've been told, if I pull out all these computer things, I believe I am facing north. But to get back to what I'm talking about, Advent, if it's a sense of new beginning, then you have to define where were you before and where you are now. Many tribal people, I observed something earlier this week where this one person said, it was a social media thing, he says, I believe we should not listen to all traditional elders or holy men because they may not have the right to express certain protocols. My opinion is, once you start setting yourself up as the expert, you're missing the dialogue. All oral tradition people do is share a journey. We've had one now for 2,000 years, but we've had a journey with the Ojibwe experience for thousands of years. Doesn't put it on a different scale. It just means I believe native spirituality, indigenous spirituality, has to be on the same equal platform. It doesn't mean it's good, better, or different. There may not be, as we previously spoke to Tim here, the technical director of this video, if you have an oral tradition, and if the Germans did this for the Advent, and if the 3rd century did this, that this is Advent, this is that, we don't know what took place in that oral tradition in tribal communities. But what took place was a strong sense of community. Because if you have a family that's together as they travel throughout the winter season, or they stay in one spot, they may be able to share the stories of creation or the stories of examples of activities that reflect coherent, being more, I would say the word would be collectively supportive of one another. If you're sitting in your, it could be your home, it could be your, how you travel, the tribal person is sharing first survival, sharing the history of movement, reflecting upon the last 3 seasons, and winter is a time to slow the process, to take time to tell stories. That correlates with the constellations, and it correlates with the dynamics of a warm fire, the dynamics of when do you lately, today here it's raining, but 3 or 4 days ago it was very cold in northeast Wisconsin. The sunrise that came from the east, the sunset that set in the north and the south. But if you have movement with tribal people, and then if you multiply the 155 communities and you multiply the various villages, you have a lot of activity. They may not see each other perhaps for 1 or 2 or 3 days or 4 days. And is a day? Was there a different context of time? Was the seasonality not based upon a 24-hour time period? One of my good researcher friends says Native people, tribal people, or Ojibwe people may have had a different context of time. If you're stuck in the snow, like as a little kid, I was 7, 8 years old and the snowbanks were high, and you're there 3 or 4 days till somebody plows you out. But today, with this technology and with weather reports and with technology, it's almost like you're trying to change environment, trying to change the creation of your ancestral setting. And that's not possible. Technology is not going to, there's climate change. It may be climate change, but the fact that today the hunting, fishing, gathering may be an intellectual aspect. The farmer may not be farming like it is, but if corporate America and if urban settings don't believe that process doesn't exist, then we're not dealing with an understanding, in my view, of the human experience. If a person who is tribal, or even non-tribal, decides to embark upon creation is important and living in a space is important, then they see the 4 seasons. You can live in an environment where you just have 1 season, but what does it have to do with Advent? It has to do with the context of hope, and the hope to me is the understanding of where you are in the place in that large setting. Now, hope is one of those words that may be faith-based, but there's a part of hope that's movement, and that's important. If you're talking about peace, the context, and I just lit the candle here on the hope for the first week of the new beginning. Talking about peace, then there's naturally, not conflict. Survival is a form of conflict, but it can be managed. If you're conflict between your brother and sister, your family, that's polarization. So you're hoping that peace comes about, and that requires great discipline. And to me, Advent is a sense of seasonality, and that sense of seasonality then interprets to a response. And the response could be, since I'm already gone through the third week of Advent for me, would be a sense of joy. Joy could be a response. It could be it's an action dynamic. Now, tribal people in the Ojibwe world may not have had, to me, they had an integration of every day is a new beginning, because they have to feed their family, take care of themselves. And joy in the old dictionary here of feeling a great pleasure and happiness. When you slow down and you take time to tell the stories of birth, of life, of passing on, of just living and understanding who you are, there's a sense of personal joy. But yet, in this environment, tribal people had to be so aware of, not a disrespect, but that's reality. The Euro-American person who came in, the dynamics of change, the government wanting to remove you, other things. But of these 155 communities, Canada was sort of foreign to the United States. There was the same problems there with colonization, but the movement, I think the movement was part of a response. And if you're moving, you're not going to be removed or relocated. There was an attempt of the tribe I'm from to remove us, and that did not happen. I know in the case of the Oneida experience from Wisconsin or New York, they were removed, relocated, and they're here. Now, what's the last one? They talk about love, but love to me means the cohesiveness of the unit, the cohesive of how you relate to yourself in community. And I believe that as the emotion of love, or the family, the friendship, the intimacy. Today, the manifestation of care for one another is perhaps organized in a manner that there's a certain risk in relationship with love and caring. But if we don't care for our fellow brother or sister every day, the context here is those elements of Advent have a relationship to, I believe, indigenous spirituality. Yet, I may be not doing this justice, because in some ways, the uncovering of an oral tradition requires great discipline in understanding where you come from, in understanding your family, in understanding your sense of place, It may be totally different if I did not live in a large area along Lake Superior. I could have lived more inland where we had small lakes and there'd be a different world view. There'd be more compression. There wouldn't be as much movement. But by me looking over the long vista of Lake Superior, the 300 mile, I'm not in others looking, but you see a dynamic that's much different. But in some ways, in a quick summary of Advent, when they say new beginning and they say a change, it usually falls into the realm of preparing for Christmas and the Jesus story and the vulnerability. But if we look at Native communities, they were vulnerable every day. They were in a survival mode, and they need to include that whole Christology within their life pattern. Now, as I previously stated, when you're out of sync and you just see it as a ritual, like in our culture of religious polity or religious experience, before I came here, somebody says, well, you folks don't do Bible reading. I said, I'm sitting here talking to you, and how do you read? Is it reading the Bible? Is it real? I tend to be a relational person. That part of that realize that you have to listen to the stories. Now, both tribal and non-tribal people, or any person around the world, may be caught up in the dynamics of contemporary lifestyles. But I was reading something here and just picked this. It says, Jesus' identity is rooted in his lineage, in his place of birth. I found that interesting. If he has a lineage, then he's also the creator, but he has a lineage. We don't talk about Joseph or Mary's grandparents or uncles and all we talk about. And then another one here says, when we express ourselves, and if it's important to be somewhat dormant in the winter, will we take the time to relax, to hear the stories? The stories within what we're doing here. I'm going to do a little kind of a Jungian dynamic. Jungian is the dream guy, the psychologist. Before I was doing this, I had a dream. I was dreaming about the local priest can see this. I was dreaming about the priest we have, and he told me an interesting story. He didn't really want to do this, but I think it was made. Just because we have 360 million people or more in the United States, we have more in the world. Not everybody connects to a native ethos. Not everyone understands indigenous spirituality. This individual shared with me that his whole life pattern, it was never the interaction with indigenous people. Now, it surprised me. There's 476 tribes. There's a history of this country. And I know the Germans did the Advent, I don't the deal. But for an individual, and people like me have grown up knowing there's Italians, there's Finnish, there's Swedish. But in this new day and age, have we lost something where we don't understand that the culture we're part of is a reflection of many different types of lineages? And I just found it interesting. I suppose if I was an intellectual, I'd say, well, that's called white male privilege. No, that's called not knowing. And if you don't take time to know something, and you don't take time to hear the oral story, whether it be Finnish, German, Italian, Swedish, on and on and on. The world is big, but we're not asking you to say all these things. But as I sit here, I saw something on social media. Somebody said, well, the Dalai Lama right now is doing his every year he does this, the 3-day listening. So somebody posted, do I have a transcript? What did he say? Can we do this? No, just accept he's doing a story. And when will you start to do your construct of a new beginning? And when will you start to understand as a human being, as whatever culture you're part of, that you have to engage in an understanding of your own oral tradition. If you don't do that, then your sense of Advent is just what I call a ritual. You do what I like about the Oneida experience, they have cedar boughs, but that stems from when they came here. They didn't have the big cathedral. They put cedar boughs down for their floor, and that was beautiful. Where I'm from, cedar has the cedar has just as much incense as the incense of the Christian system. So the ceremony is so important. But to get back to my friend, he wasn't saying that in a negative. A lot of people just don't understand one another in the context of understanding what really is Advent all about. Now, the language doesn't help, because the word sin to us in our culture is being out of community. I mean, I know there's people who are violent, there's people who are just out of control in their mental and anger and trauma. But the true definition to me is, if you don't live in community, then you can't define restorative justice, you can't define how we can model healthy behavior. So in conclusion, as my technical director is already saying, going like this or going like that, no, actually, he's falling asleep. No, just kidding, let the record show. But this is a very generalized understanding of Advent, but I'll repeat three things. Advent is a new beginning. Two, in the Ojibwe Anishinaabe way, we have had Advent, a new beginning, every day as we move through life. The third one is, if we can integrate and understand our lineage, then we can identify with the Jesus movement, or with the Creator movement. Because it just dawned on me, if Jesus had the identity rooted in his lineage and where he lived, we don't talk about his grandparents, his great-grandparents. We don't talk about that, but enough said. So I want to thank this Advent season. I mean, I'm just like everyone else. We're preparing for the Christmas season. We're preparing. And the vulnerability to me of Christmas is, if you're really a true human, you're constantly in a vulnerable state. We're never in a solid state. So I want to thank the people who may hear this. We all have as many different definitions of Advent, but from an indigenous, I call it my Native American theological point of view. I'm not doubting the scholarship of 2,000 years. I'm not doubting this. But as I started, I says, sound is the most logical sense. So maybe I better relax, be a little dormant, and even though I'm going to do a couple of more of these monthly, I'm sure not going to do one every day. Because the winter time is a time to slow down, and springtime is the time to be active. But in this technological society, in this modern society, are we willing to take the risk and slow down? Thank you.